I was isolated, except when I was at my job. And I had some friends down there, but I didn't hang out with them as much as I could have or should have, because I wanted to be in my warm, comfy place of being with toxic alcohol in my condo right after I got off of work. And then, of course, I would incapacitate myself and not be able to go out and be with the people that I should have been getting my endorphins from the whole time. So a place is what you make of it. With some exceptions. If you lived in the North Pole, you might want to go somewhere warmer. But largely speaking, a place is what you make of it.
It's so easy to isolate. It's easier than ever before and only getting easier. But evolutionarily, we are actually social creatures. Like you said, even for people such as you and I that are introverted, that can be very outgoing, but then we need to, if we're around people too much, it can zap our energy. So we need to recharge by ourselves. But even introverts, we're social creatures. We need to be around other people. And if we don't have that, especially over prolonged time, and so, yeah, this is weird, but I've had to really accept that and embrace it, that, we need people.
Thanks for tuning in to the Elevation Recovery Podcast, your hub for addiction recovery strategies, hosted by Chris Scott and Matt Finch.
Welcome to episode 243 of Elevation Recovery. My name is Matt Finch, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Chris Scott. Good to see you again. I loved your interview with Dr. Umhau, all about calcium and other micronutrients for alcohol recovery. That guy is a genius. And I had never seen him on video before, because that was his first video you did with him. You had interviewed him when we were just audio only in the past. He just looks so just mellow and good-hearted. You can tell that he really likes to help people big time. It was just shining through his energy, basically.
He's one of my favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he's brilliant and humble as well. I know that if I were to call him brilliant, and I think I have, he goes, "Oh, no, not brilliant." Just a very, very good man, and definitely brilliant. And always has a new take on something. Every time I talk to him, we talked on the phone we always talk on the phone for longer than intended, because I try to keep things for the podcast, because if I have a guest and we start talking about the podcast and the topics, sometimes we'll do the podcast and no one's listening and we didn't record it. You know how it goes.
Yeah.
But it's endearing, because that tends to happen with him. But he's so generous that he's happy to do it all over again, even though he's super busy and I'm sure pressed for time and has so much other work to do. But yeah, I'd never heard of that calcium study for alcohol withdrawal. That was super interesting. We talked about endorphins as well, and something really pertinent, which, and I think anyone who is interested in any of this should go back and listen to that particular episode, which is on YouTube, and also the Elevation Recovery Podcast, wherever they download that. But Dr. Umhau was talking about how endorphins are so important for alcohol recovery, and that people are basically trying to rely on artificial endorphins. I mean, it's the real endorphins, but I would say toxic and artificial in my kind of jargon, from alcohol, that they should be getting from other people. And when you have people who stop isolating and start doing things with other people, then they release those endorphins. It's not just oxytocin. I used to think it was just the oxytocin, but you actually do have a healthier endorphin system to the extent that you're with other people doing things on a daily basis. That's obviously really tough, depending on where someone lives right now, and depending on the state of the lockdowns or social distancing or people wearing masks. There are all sorts of subtle things going on with facial cues. I know there's been concern with kids in school, for several years, in formative years, potentially having stunted ability to understand other people's expressions. Now, we don't know what's going on with the endorphin system, but probably not a good thing. So this is a particularly challenging time for, I would say, people, regardless of whether or not they have a substance abuse issue, to try to maximize endorphins by being with other people, and either minimize the probability that they fall into a substance use habit that turns out to be destructive, or help them recover from one that they did have. So I think it's super important. And to some extent, you can release endorphins talking to people on Zoom or FaceTiming or calling, but it's just not the same. I mean, I think we're really complex biochemical creatures, and you need to have that one-on-one time with someone. So for people who live alone, now I would fall into that category, except I have two awesome dogs. My parents live 10 minutes away. I have a really good friend who lives in about 7 minutes from me. Almost every day during the limited lockdowns that we had in Savannah last year, he would come over and we would play pool. And I think that really got me through that part of the crisis or the pandemic. And then after that, Savannah has not been the worst place to be. There's not a lot of paranoia, and people are kind of going about their business. Some days I forget that there is a pandemic. So I think, but if people are in Australia or if people are in other places, it seems like the further north you go, like I have friends who live up in the Northeast. It seems like they're in a different world, and a lot of them sound depressed. And I don't know if they know they're depressed. So this is not a political commentary on what ought to be done at a macro level. This is a commentary on the inevitable effects that you get from tinkering with social interactions. And there's no denial that that has happened. So I think it's something that needs to be pointed out, especially in the context of alcohol recovery, that when there is this massive change and sweeping regulations that affect our social interactions, we have to be prepared to mitigate that for ourselves.
Oh, I love it. Have you heard of, before I get into this new, really compelling, interesting, and insightful research study, have you heard of how Julia Ross calls those artificial endorphins? She calls them exorphans instead of endorphins. Exorphans. When you drink alcohol, or when you take opioids, or when you eat, a really processed white flour, that creates these exorphins. So kind of outside of us, instead of exercising, or instead of hanging out with people, like papaya is a huge source of endorphin, dopamine, and oxytocin at a minimum, because she's just so beautiful, and I'm so in tune with neurotransmitters and how they feel. And you and I have done so much research into this and self-experimentation that I can just feel what neurotransmitters she's boosting. But for people that are low in endorphin, low in other things, that's why I got addicted. Excuse me. That's why I got addicted to opioids. I had real low endorphin, real low dopamine. So when I took those, they created those exorphins and this huge amounts of dopamine that I had never felt before. And that balanced me out. And then above that, it gave me a surplus. And so I was like, oh, I feel so good. Some people, and I've done this in the past, will binge on a bunch of pizza, and that spikes all your exorphins really high. But of course, it's not the healthiest way to do it, especially when you do it on a regular basis. But talking about the pandemic and how it has really affected people, I want to talk about this study. This was on Forbes. The title was something like, "Why Many People Are Turning to Robots and AI to Help Them with Mental Health." It was a really sexy title. So let me just read a few quotes, then we can talk a little bit about it, because this relates to almost everybody. Anybody that's working, anybody that's been a working adult during the pandemic. To better understand how workers feel and what they're going through, Oracle, the large technology company, conducted a survey of 14,600 employees, managers, human resources leaders, and C-level executives, right, Paya? Across 13 countries to find out how the pandemic affects the mental health of workers around the world. Check this stuff out. There's just some staggering. Here's the title: "Why Many People Are Turning to Robots and AI to Help Support Their Mental Health and Careers." And I screenshotted several of the text. Here we go. Here are some of the study highlights, Chris and audience, from the study. Over 75% of people feel stuck personally and professionally. That's the most staggering one to me. 3 out of every 4 people, this is the United States. Oh, wait, I think it was many different countries, right? This is not just America. This was like a bunch of countries, more than 10,000 people. Since the start of the pandemic, 88% of people believe their meaning of success has changed. 85% of people want technology to help define their future. 62% of people around 2021 said that 2021 was the most stressful year of their entire lives. So 6 out of every 10 people said 2021 was the most stressful year ever. More than half, 52% of people struggled with mental health at work in 2021, more than 2020. It just goes on and on. There's so many different statistics. How about that? 75% of all the people they interviewed in this study across all those countries, all these people in the workforce, 75% feel stuck personally and professionally. And the, kind of the summary of it was how at the workplace, they don't want to go, if they have mental health problems, many of them don't feel comfortable talking to their manager. Many, especially the CEOs, the top people, were the least likely to want to go to like HR or their manager to talk about mental health. And they would prefer talking to an AI, like either a physical robot or some type of AI. So a software where you can write in what your problem is, how you're feeling. And then there's like prompts and everything. And then it gives you suggestions of, oh, these types of treatments could be helpful for this, such as like CBT, going to see a therapist. And so I knew that the pandemic just seriously destroyed the mental health. And there's another study right now where kids' mental health overall, this is for America, is at an all-time low. And it's like really scary. That was like really hard for me to read. So, it's been a while since I've checked up on anything about mental health addiction statistics due to the pandemic, because that got old quick, just like, it just keeps going down. But that was real interesting stuff to me. It's just like you were just saying, the kind of unintended consequences of lockdowns, of wearing masks and such. Well, mental health and addiction, people are less satisfied at work. People are quitting. It's hard to hire people, like people are fighting to get the good employees, because so many people have really had the time during the lockdown to reevaluate what they really want to do with their life, what they really want, what's really important to them, what success really means. I think so many people had that evaluation, self-inquiry time, and people are just like, I'm not going to go work at a stressful place when the managers or when the people, there's no empathy, there's no support. It's just like grind, and they expect you to do all these things. So many people reevaluated their lives and they're like, I would rather have mental health, flexibility, passion and purpose for my career, even if it means a big pay cut. So people are it's like this great awakening, basically, where the masses are waking up to what's really important. It's not the make tons of money, get, find the perfect mate, have a house with the white picket fence and all that. That was the old dream. And for a lot of people, it still is. And it's a very worthwhile dream. But I think people are really, really discovering what they really want. When a few years ago, I became an essentialist, not a minimalist, but an essentialist, meaning I don't hang out with people or do work stuff or spend my time or purchase things that aren't essential to my health, happiness, fulfillment, and growth as a person and helping other people. So before I was like, I want to get this vehicle and I want to get this home. And of course, I'm going to get all that stuff and want it. But before I was obsessive about it. I was just like, and I thought that here's the distinction. I thought that I would be happy once I had all those things. I had this big list of accomplishments I needed to make, many of them material objects, until I could feel happy and good enough. And like I was, a value asset to a girl and to the world in general. So that's just completely different now. I'm fine just how I am. Of course, I still want lots of different things, but it's not like this obsessive thing. And so what do you think about that, my man? All those statistics of people are just fed up. They're just over it. This shit's gone on so long. People are reevaluating things and making changes.
I think there's a lot going on for better and for worse. depending on the person, depending on the community, depending on the slice of the population that we're talking about. I think there are some people who are probably dropping out in a sense due to things like depression and social isolation. And they literally, to talk in our common biochemical parlance here, they might not have the endorphins to handle pain or challenges, and that's not a good thing. On the other hand, there are probably people who are not necessarily depressed, who have had this awakening and who may not be going through a period of depression, but rather a period of awakening, as you said. And maybe they're finding that they're able now to start the online business that they always wanted to start. You and I, in a sense, were, well, not forced, but we were led into the online business path before it was cool, or maybe right about as it turned cool. I still had some people who thought I was really wacky.
We helped to turn it cool.
That's right. We were the trendsetters, us and Joe Rogan and others. But no, I mean, obviously people have been doing this for a long time. The podcast, we didn't start podcasting until relatively late. And that's really, we haven't even really monetized this podcast. It's more of a project of passion. But as far as for you, opiate addiction support, for me, fit recovery, and, coaching people, I remember the first time I ever did a coaching session with someone. And actually, I remember the first time I ever got an affiliate commission. I remember I made like $3 on the Amazon affiliate program. I was like, whoa, that's amazing. Like there's actually a job. Maybe I could help people for a living. Maybe for some people, they're finding that that's the case for them. Probably not in the addiction recovery niche, but maybe, who knows? They could be writing about their favorite types of fishing poles and helping people pick. I don't know. There's a myriad of things that people could be doing online, or they could just be working remotely and deciding that, after having stepped back from the chaos of being in the office all the time, that they don't care as much about that promotion as they thought they did when they were hyper competitive with a bunch of people in the office all the time. And so they're going to spend more time with their kids because they're able to be more present with their kids. So they still want to have their job. And in that case, you would see, actually in both of those cases I just talked about, you would see why people would want technology or AI to play a bigger role in their lives. Now, I think there's a dark side also of technology and AI playing a bigger role in people's lives, mostly depending on who's controlling the technology or the AI. Is it really going to be an open source free type of thing? Or are you going to have people who consult the doctor AI and it prescribes Prozac for everyone at a very high dosage? Who knows? Those are questions that have to be answered. So, which is not to say that Prozac should never be prescribed, but you don't want like a one size fits all, or you don't want bad customization from an AI as well. I remember I had long dreamed of coming up with some AI system for the nutrient repair piece to give people the perfect, and I still want that to happen. In the meantime, I was able to find Chris Engen. So now we're collaborating on a course. And so she does the full immersion into the amino acid therapy, which is a huge part of the puzzle. It's not the only part of the puzzle, but within the biopsychosocial spiritual pillars and approach, the hierarchy that I talk about, she's the best asset that I could possibly find for that amino acid part of the biochemical pillar. And so she is my AI. For now. And I don't mean to imply that she works for me because, she has her own business and we collaborate, but
she's your HI, human intelligence.
Sure. Right. She's the HI that's as good as any AI out there, work directly with Julia Ross, who's the pioneer of amino acid therapy. So eventually, hopefully she and I can help make something that is a sort of AI and really scale that to reach millions of people who need help with amino acid therapy and with broader nutrient repair and with the broader biopsychosocial spiritual pieces of recovering. So in a nutshell, I think that as with anything, there are nuances. There are things to be worried about. There are people who are isolating, who are sort of giving up. One of the discouraging things that I found in my area is it's really hard to find handymen or people to do. This is a high quality problem, but my jet ski has been broken for the last 2 months, which is partially my fault. I got a new one and I cracked the hull on a sandbar. So I found someone by some miracle, really great guy, and he fixed the hole. And now the engine's malfunctioning. The check engine light's on. I'm not a Sea-Doo engineer. I have no idea what's going on. And unfortunately, the person who's been so good for the last several years is kind of ducked out of the workforce for that particular thing. As far as I know, he had his own business and was doing that, but very hard to find people. Of course, people are afraid about inflation. People are worried about rising food prices. You would think they would work more, but maybe they're downsizing. Maybe they're moving. I don't know. Like there's a whole bunch of different things that people are doing in response to perceived crises that aren't good, or at least not good for everyone. Might be good for them. But I can only hope that most of it is people having some sort of grand awakening. And I hope that the people in our audience have been able to take some time to reflect about what they really do want. I'm going to butcher this quote, but I think it was Tony Robbins who said something to the effect that the biggest failure of all is to have material success and not figure out how to enjoy your life. And he said it in a much better way. But basically what that means,
success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure.
There you go. Boom. All right. That beautiful. And I really think that's true. And that's actually allowed me through the ups and downs of running an online business myself. And as you know, there are times when it seems like you're reaching everyone. And then there are times where it's like, where did everyone go? Have we been abandoned? What's going on? Luckily, I think we've reached a point now that we'll never feel like we've been totally abandoned, but there's still ups and downs. And whenever there's a down period, I actually feel grateful because I understand now after doing this for a certain period of time that what makes me happy is, stability, biochemical stability, sleep, routines, habits, exercise, and relationships. Relationships being super important. I've got my dogs here. I've got my parents not too far away. I've got a really good friend not too far away. And I've got wonderful friends from college who I talk with once every couple of days on the phone and who I meet up with several times a year. We've even been able to meet up during this pandemic. Once every few months. We haven't stopped doing that. So it's really about relationships. I've always said about a particular place where you live in, like a place is what you make of it, which I didn't used to know. Like I basically did the standard alcoholic thing back when I fled New York. I went to Delaware for 6 months and I really thought that my problems were caused by New York City. There might have been some validity to that because it's like a giant playground for people who drink and have money. But I didn't stop drinking in Delaware. And then I fled Delaware after 6 months and I went to Atlanta and I was like, this is going to be the place where I'll be happy. And of course, the first thing I do is go to a bar. It's like, why haven't I automatically stopped going to a bar? My biochemistry was off. I didn't make an attempt to make new friends. I was isolated, except when I was at my job. And I had some friends down there, but I didn't hang out with them as much as I could have or should have because I wanted to be in my warm, comfy place of being with toxic alcohol in my condo right after I got off of work. And then, of course, I would incapacitate myself and not be able to go out and be with the people that I should have been getting my endorphins from the whole time. So a place is what you make of it, with some exceptions. That if you lived in the North Pole, you might want to go somewhere warmer. But largely speaking, a place is what you make of it. Now in Savannah, I've got my MMA trainer who's become one of my best friends. He's a great guy, and people there, I go 3 times a week for a couple hours each time, and I just have a ball. I'm on a high when I leave that place every single time. I've got my deep tissue massage therapist, my chiropractor. It sounds silly, but I have all these great people. I'm a regular in some restaurants, some very casual ones, and then some occasionally fancy ones. It's nice to be at regular places where you're not going to black out. And it's also nice to have relationships for all of the things that you do that are mundane. And yet in the course of doing those mundane things, you actually release a lot of endorphins because you enjoy the people that you're with when you're doing them. So like when you can get high every day from being around cool people. My friend Angus in college used to say, he was from San Diego. He grew up in Leucadia and he was a surfer guy. And I think back then I had a similar insight about how I was glad that we got into college. I was worried that we were freshman year roommates. I said, I was worried I wouldn't like anyone, but people seem pretty cool. It's good to know. And he goes, yeah, man, there's chillers everywhere. And that kind of stuck with me. Like, it's true. I forgot about it during my alcohol years because I didn't apparently want to hang out with people. I was isolated by my alcohol habit. And even when I went out, I wasn't present with people because I was drunk or in withdrawal or hungover. But now that's stuck with me. Like there's chillers everywhere, just have to find them. There are different ways to do that. And, don't let a day go by where you don't feel grateful for the relationships that you do have. Because even if you live in a palace and you have like a $10,000 cold plunge pool and a sauna and a steam room and a golden toilet and the most comfortable bed ever, you're not going to be happy if you don't have anyone to enjoy on a daily basis. We're social creatures.
We're so social, so tribal. Think about it. I mean, up until, very recently in history, we were in tribes and then eventually communities. And now with our beautiful iPhones and Androids and laptops and smart TVs and especially our phones and Netflix and Amazon delivery and Grubhub delivery and Uber Eats, it's so easy to isolate. It's easier than ever before and only getting easier. But evolutionarily, we are actually social creatures, like you said, even for people such as you and I that are introverted, that can be very outgoing, but then we need to, if we're around people too much, it can zap our energy. So we need to recharge by ourselves. But even introverts, we're social creatures. We need to be around other people. And if we don't have that, especially over prolonged time, I had one client that was totally isolating. This was the very beginning of the pandemic, and she was drinking and using, a few different substances. She didn't even leave her home for like the first 6 months. Not only did she not go around, have people over or hang out with anybody, she didn't even step foot. I think it's called agoraphobia, which I went through a phase of. I guess I went through a few phases of that. Fear of, big outside spaces, really fear of leaving your home. My sister had agoraphobia for a few years after she quit smoking cannabis. There was like 2 years probably where she lived with our parents and she just hardly ever left the house. My dad would have to go get her takeout food or get her things, and she was just not in good condition. And so, yeah, this is weird, but I've had to like really accept that and embrace it, that, we need people. There was a long phase in my life where I was like, man, I could just be so happy with like no one in my life. If I just had this awesome place to live with all sorts of books and music equipment, I could play with people or hang out with people maybe once a month and be fine. That's bullshit, total bullshit. And now I'm so interdependent with people. The solo cast I just put out, I was talking about how some of my biggest mental health, physical health, spiritual health boosters and just fulfillment boosters, combination of living in this great place, the treehouse we call it, having a really solid, healthy, profoundly healthy relationship with Ashley. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary and her birthday too. Willow, such a great, healthy, well-adjusted kid. Papaya. So for all my life, I had these toxic, unhealthy relationships with dishonesty on both parts, infidelity at times oftentimes the girl's part, but a few times on my part too. Not safe places to live some of the times, like just real, trashy places in bad areas. And so now I got this complete family. Kid, Papaya the pet, who's really like a human, and then a relationship, this wonderful treehouse, and that combined with consistency. So I'm surrounded by people and then this animal that I just love them so much, and vice versa. And Papaya, gosh, everyone should have some type of animal for mental health. That's just such a huge game changer when you really spend time with the animal and the pets. And so then the consistency, I never had long-term consistency before at fitness, at nutrition especially. I would start and stop. Even after, the first few years after coming off drugs and alcohol, I did really good for maybe 2 years. But then after that, there was a phase of several years where I'd go on eating benders for months and months. I would stop exercising. I would start binging lots of TV and stuff. And I would just fall out of my health habits my personal and professional development habits, my routines, my rituals. And then sometimes I'd be in these ruts for a long time, especially having like ADHD type tendencies back then, where I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I couldn't focus. So nowadays, the people in my life, I've just built up so much human recovery capital. Ashley, Willow, Papaya's a person, in my opinion. She's a person in the form of a parrot. You, Tana, my parents, and a bunch of other people that I either talk with on the phone or hang out in person. And so, and I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I don't have anxiety or other types of mental health issues. So I actually don't feel uncomfortable hanging out with people or being vulnerable and like authentic with people. I'm not trying to like put up this mask hanging out with certain people to be like a chameleon of what I think that they would expect of me. So much crazy, unhealthy, weird stuff from back in the day. But that took time. That took a lot of transformation over time, over many years for me personally, with my stuff to work on. So I got a feeling that there are quite a few people listening or watching right now that are isolating. They're drinking and isolating, or they're using drugs and isolating, or both. Maybe one of the reasons is stigma. Maybe one of the reasons is when you got your substance or substances and they're producing those neurochemicals to make you feel those feelings, even though it's kind of a more of like a disempowering way to get them versus hanging out with people and exercising with people, laughing and loving with people, it still meets our needs nonetheless. It's not the best vehicle to meet those needs of connection. But when I used to do heroin, I didn't need anybody. I would just be sitting there smoking the heroin or snorting Oxycontins before that. I didn't need people. I could be so euphoric and hyped up and confident at home, and I wouldn't need to go hang out with people at all. Oftentimes I would go hang out with people just because in upstate New York, small town, and I worked at a place that was real busy, and I was in a band, a real popular band. So I was, with people a lot. But when I moved back to San Diego, I'd just be in the bedroom smoking heroin, or I'd just go for a drive or something, because heroin was boosting dopamine and endorphins so high that that's like the love cocktail. When people are first courting each other and they go on a first date, and this can even happen through like chatting on Tinder or Facebook or Instagram, messaging back and forth. You don't even have to be in personal contact. People can develop first a crush or this chemistry, then it can turn into infatuation. And that infatuation is a combination of endorphin and dopamine and oxytocin. That's why people are like, oh, I love this person so much. Oftentimes, they're confusing love with infatuation. Infatuation fades over time, and then love develops in the place of it. And it's different, especially unconditional love. Unconditional love is completely different than loving a person, loving a place, loving any type of thing. That's conditional love. But yeah, we can really, really have wonderful lives, but oftentimes for people, it's not easy. And then the circumstances in the community and at this part, the whole globe, they can make it more difficult for some people. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos of Amazon and other companies, the pandemic was the best thing that ever happened to their business and themselves and their income. So, but it's not what happens to us. This is another Tony Robbins thing, and he learned this from someone else. But it's not what happens to us. It's the meaning that we interpret to what happens to us.
Attribute
my
to
addiction.
It, right?
Yeah. My addiction I could have seen it as the worst thing ever. But then after I overcame it and made it my mission to help other people do the same, turns out, apart from, having Willow and this relationship and everything, being able to help others with, a challenge that I overcame, and being able to help others to, get some insight into how they can tackle it. That means that my long, severe, almost 20-year addiction with all sorts of various things turned out to be the best thing ever. It's like, but it takes time and experience to be able to look back. And this is a Steve Jobs quote. We cannot connect the dots looking forward. We can only connect the dots looking backward. So when I look back at my life, I can connect all the dots to, I don't regret anything, because everything that happened brought me to where I am now. And I really like this place. So there's no point. I wish I did that different. Oh, I regret doing that. You can't go back in time. So it's really the meaning that we give to situations, like that book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. People in the prison, Auschwitz concentration camp, could keep a good mindset and a positive outlook, really wanting to survive that experience, to make it their mission to tell people about what fucking happened and make sure that it never happens. And again, let's hope that it doesn't happen again. My goodness gracious. But yeah, the meaning that we give to events, how we're actually narrating the things that are happening. We could say, oh, this sucks. The grocery store is so busy. Why are all these people here? It's a fucking grocery store. That's what people are supposed to, because this used to be me. I used to be like, oh my God, why is it so crowded here? Well, it's like, well, I'm here too. I'm the one making it crowded. So it's like these kind of things, these habitual, automatic negative thoughts. Once we start figuring out what those thoughts are, policing those thoughts, finding out if they're true, and then squashing them, eventually you get to the point where no negative thoughts, no disempowering thoughts come in on a daily basis, maybe one a week or something like that. And then you're just thinking good thoughts, or you're not even thinking, you're just being present and experiencing. And from that, life just takes on, you become fearless. And no matter what happens externally in the community, in the city, in the state, in the globe, the country, you're okay because you're fearless. You don't fear all that stuff because we can control how we interpret it, what the meaning is, and how we're going to respond versus react to it.
That was a hell of a monologue. And I don't know if I can match that. I think we'll probably save some themes for the next podcast. But yeah, I agree with everything you've said. And by the way, congratulations on your anniversary and Ashley's birthday as well. And while you were talking, I was thinking I omitted before saying that I'm grateful that I've been able to keep going out to San Diego, not quite as often as I've wanted to, but I've made it there twice in the last year, or maybe 3 times in the last year. I don't know, twice in the last 6 months, right? Which is pretty good. And then that's it. Again, it would be easy for me back during my drinking career, so to call it, to say, oh, well, San Diego is just a beautiful place and it's got beaches and whatever. I like going to San Diego because you're there. And because we always have these like sacred rituals now of like going body surfing and like being earthing and being in the sun. Like nothing is more fun than that. And going for the hike in Torrey Pines that we did. Eating tight food, getting some seafood and being in the sun, like all of it is amazing. But really the terrain and the natural beauty, of course, there are studies showing that people tend to be happier when they live in coastal areas or when they're surrounded by a lot of greenery, trees, etc., that they have better levels of mental health. But all of that just augments the fact that, if it weren't for you, I don't think I ever would have gone out there. And I started going out several years ago, first to visit you. And I happened to form an attachment with Pacific Beach, just because I like being by the beach. I like being on that beach. It's kind of lively and people are working out and really low key and laid back and don't seem to have a care in the world. But I wouldn't have gone out there if we didn't have our friendship, and which was really a guest post that morphed into a partnership and a friendship. And now we're very good friends. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing that gives meaning to people's lives. And it's not just, even if Fit Recovery or this podcast were to crash or an EMP blast, wiped out the internet, God forbid, you and I would still be friends for a very long time. And so there's certain meanings that you get from relationships that really transcend careerist things or financial goals. Obviously, it's not fun on the other side of the spectrum to be perpetually in debt or to have your car repossessed. Or it's not good to be in bad financial shape. But at a certain point, I think they've had studies on this where they found the number always changes and it'll probably keep changing, especially if we have some inflation. But past a certain amount of income, your level of happiness generally sort of peaks, and it doesn't get that much higher. When you go from a mini yacht to a mega yacht, you don't go from like a level 60 to a level 100 in happiness. It's really, now maybe you do if in the same time period you forge a bunch of new relationships and you enjoy the mega yacht more with other people. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to strive for some material ambitions, but at the same time, you won't enjoy those things. You won't even enjoy natural beauty, and unless you're a very rare type, the yogi type that maybe was meant. Maybe for some people, their destiny is to retreat to a cave and meditate for the rest of their lives. I am an introvert for sure, but I'm not one of those people. So again, outliers for nearly everything. But I would urge anyone who is isolating due to substance, especially alcohol, to reconsider the isolation strategy, because you're simply not going to squeeze out the level of endorphins that you will if you biochemically rebalance yourself and surround yourself with great people. And it takes time, it takes effort, but it is well worth it. And also don't confuse post-acute withdrawal, which is the state that you'll be in for a certain amount of time that you can minimize with nutrient repair and high quality support, relationships, etc., and lifestyle changes, exercise, sleep, everything that we talk about in this podcast. Don't mistake the period of post-acute withdrawal or acute withdrawal with what life is like without your drug, because that's not what life is like. That's what life is like when your brain is in a state of limbo and it's turned the dial down on your natural feel-good chemical production because you've been artificially subbing in these toxic substances for so long that it's temporarily forgotten how to produce them. But you can teach your brain how to produce them again. And I think it's best to do it in a holistic way. We talk a lot about supplements. We talk a lot about brain changes that are going on. But obviously things like exercise and lifestyle, it all really boils down to your relationships and who you do these things with. What kind of support do you have as well? And I was remarking in my last podcast with Dr. Umhau, and I hadn't made this connection until he had brought this up about the endorphins and people releasing more endorphins with other people rather than alone or with their substances. When I started doing deadlifts, that was like my prescription for early recovery and minimizing post-acute withdrawal, especially before I figured out some of the more intricate amino acid protocols and other supplements. I did deadlifts with a group of guys. And when I moved from Atlanta to Savannah, I no longer had a group of guys to do deadlifts with. So after a certain period of time, I plateaued in the deadlifts department and I ended up finding an MMA gym. And now I get a huge amount of satisfaction doing MMA with another group of people. And because I have relationships with those people. So it's oxytocin, it's endorphins, but it's also something really meaningful and something that can only be described in a spiritual level as well.
Oh, this is amazing stuff. 2014, when I started opiateaddictionsupport.com, the first thing I made was this free opioid withdrawal guide, or back then opiate withdrawal guide. And it was came out to 6,000 words, maybe even more than that. It was really long. And I was doing a bunch of research as I was going through all these sections on how to get through opioid withdrawal at home. And one of the things I learned was that, like you were just saying, when you exercise by yourself, of course, it boosts endorphins. But when you exercise with one person or multiple people, you boost more endorphin, more oxytocin. And then when you work out outside, you boost more endorphin. And so you and I, when you visit here, we're outside in the sun and there's two of us. I mean, imagine all the bliss chemicals we're boosting. And, a lot of people will not work out because they don't have anyone to work out with. No one wants to work out, or they're too afraid to ask them or something like that. And a lot of people can't stay on a workout routine because it's just all up to them. So if people in that situation, get a workout buddy, hire a trainer for a while. This is the last thing I have to say, then we can close this up unless you got more. But when I used to go surfing a lot, I don't surf hardly ever anymore, but I body surf. But when I used to surf all the time throughout my childhood, as a teenager, most of my 20s until I moved to upstate New York, I would love going out by myself. But when I was with one person, it'd be so much more fun. Oftentimes, we'd have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of us. I had a 1982 white Toyota Corolla, 5-speed stick shift station wagon that I bought from my aunt Annie for $800 after working all summer rolling pretzels at Pretzel Art for $4.25 an hour before taxes for the business owner, my boss, Harris Abraham Golden, this Jewish guy from New York that looked like Super Mario from Super Mario Brothers. And he was always smoking joints and stuff. And he had this thick New York accent. It was super cool. I loved that guy. I worked for him for 5 years. But anyways, that car, we could fit a bunch of surfboards, bodyboards, fins, towels, wetsuits, you know. So it'd be me driving. And sometimes we'd squeeze 4 people in the back, usually, you know, 2 or 3 max. But imagine me, then someone in the front, 4 people in the back. So there's 6 of us rolling up to the beach. Now the waves aren't good here. Let's check this beach up. Let's check PB, for example. And the waves suck here. Let's go to La Jolla. So we would check the waves, see where it was the best at, and then we'd agree on some place. And then there'd be, you know, between 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 of us outside in the sun a lot of the time, you know, getting our gear on and going out and exercising and riding waves together and being in the ocean and the sun or even the clouds, the fresh air, the power of Mother Nature and the waves, sometimes that could be deadly. And we're all sharing these experiences together, rooting for each other when we see each other catching a wave, being like, oh my God, is he going to make this? That was so just amazing. There's not even words to describe some of the surf sessions I had with like life-altering waves that would just, you get one perfect tube and I'd be stoked for like a week. But if I was riding those same waves all by myself, the bliss and the fulfillment was nowhere close. It'd be awesome. It'd be a great workout still, and I'd still be really stoked. But when I was out there with my good friends and we're out there sharing those waves and that experience, oh, that power, that just shows you just how social we are. Just that one example of, you know, the comparison, or you versus, you know, doing deadlifts by yourself or doing deadlifts with other people, or now doing your long several hour MMA workouts with your trainer who's now good friends. Like, game changer when we're hanging out with people. And I guess it also depends on the people. So, you know, that's probably the best recovery capital you could get, or just life capital for fulfillment. Relationships, relationships, relationships.